everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared, and today I'm talking to Elie Mischel. He is with Israel365. He is the content director, and I've spoken to him before. It's basically him that contacted me, got me set up with that interview that I did with Adam Berkowitz, and then talking with Rabbi Gerfine, which has been amazing. As you guys know, we've talked a lot about, what we've talked about with what I've talked about with Rabbi Gerfine. And now I get to talk to him. So, like I said, he's with Israel365, but he's originally from the US and now living in Israel. And so, Elie, I first wanted to ask you, I'm always curious with all my guests, the ones that have made Aliyah or immigrated to Israel. How did that come about? Like, did you grow up religious, or how did you get to that point where you decided that you wanted to move to Israel?
Thank you so much for having me. First of all, it's really a great joy to be here with you. And as you said, this connection, it's only growing and building. And I think, just as a preface to say, I think it's really just amazing that to bring the Jewish and Mormon communities together in this way, and this kind of conversation is it's really meaningful, and we're on the cutting edge. So, God willing, together we'll bring good things to the world. But when it comes to Aliyah, it's definitely not a simple thing, because even though, as a Jew, I was raised to believe very much that this is my home, and I believe it fully. Moving countries from across the ocean, cultures and languages, it's never a simple thing.
Right.
But I really do have to thank my parents, first and foremost, who they were the ones who became more traditionally observant, more religious, more connected to our Jewish heritage. They took that major step here in America. They got connected actually while they were in college at the University of Buffalo, and for them, Israel was a huge part of it from the very beginning. So when we were growing up, I remember in 1987, my dad left us for about 2 months. He picked up and got leave from his job and went to Israel, because in 1987 was the first Arab Intifada, which was like an Arab uprising, and there were terror attacks everywhere, and all the men were getting called up to serve in the reserves just to try to keep peace in the country, and they needed manpower. And so my father left his Wall Street job to go to a kibbutz in Israel and work with baby chickens for 2 months.
Oh my God.
So as a kid,
yeah,
when your father does something like that, it really makes an impression. And when I saw that they didn't just talk the talk, but my parents walked the walk, it really it built a really strong connection and attachment to Israel, and one which it took me a while to actually get here. I was 40 years old when I made Aliyah, when we moved to Israel. But that's for other reasons, meaning we were doing, I think, important work in New Jersey, and we have a whole big Jewish community in America that we don't want to forget about. But I never forgot about Israel, and always felt, frankly, you may laugh when you hear this, but I always felt like a second-class Jew. When you're living outside of Israel, you're living outside of the center of Israel, of the Jewish people's destiny, right? You're living on the periphery. Now, I don't mean, God forbid, to take anything away from America, from the United States, which is I'm deeply grateful to. I always will feel, always see myself as American. I believe America is a nation of kindness, right? If you think about all the good that America has done over the generations in the world, and how it's been the greatest home outside of Israel for the Jewish people in our history, I'm deeply thankful to America. But at the same time, when it comes to the Jewish people and our unique destiny, Israel is where history is being made. And at a certain point in my life, I felt that it was time. I didn't want to be second class anymore. I wanted to be a part of what was happening here. And the truth is, the number 40 was very meaningful to me. The people of Israel wandered for 40 years in the desert before they entered the land. So I wandered throughout exile for 40 years before I entered the land with my family. So this is where the Jewish people belong. It's our homeland, and it's such an essential part of Judaism. You can't disentangle it. And
no.
So the question is not why am I here? The question is, why is any Jew not here?
Yeah, and every time I have a Jewish guest, I always say it's not that we want you gone, but like from a religious perspective, it's nice to see prophecy being fulfilled. And and you probably are, most if not all of you, supposed to at some point get there. And so it's like an amazing thing to witness, and it's something that my church watches and we're excited about. I think we talked before one time. One of the first things that my church did in the very early days, like only I think it was 11 years after it was officially formed, is one of our apostles was sent to Israel, which was very difficult back then because it was 1841, and he made it to the Mount of Olives. His name is Orson Hyde, and he dedicated the land of Israel for the return of the Jews. And since that time, there had been a few more that had gone back to dedicate it again. But for us in my church, it's like it's amazing to witness after 2,000
It
years.
happens to be. It happens to be, Joe. Just to interject, it's actually amazing that that many Christians understood that it was time for the Jewish people to return to the land of Israel before most of the Jewish people realized that it was time to return to the land of Israel. It's one of those amazing historical phenomena. And you know, you talk about 1840. That was 56 years before Theodore Herzl launched the modern Zionist movement in 1896.
Yeah.
And to think that there were, and he was not the only one. There were to think that that there were Christians who understood this. It's really, it boggles the mind, and it shows how deeply intertwined all of us are.
Yeah, for sure. Now I'm just curious. Did your parents ever end up going, or are they in the States or?
So my not only did my parents go, but my entire family, all my siblings, everyone went. And I'm the last one. We were the last ones to make it to Israel. And my wife's entire family has come here, and her parents are coming in a few months this summer. So, in a few months from now, all of our immediate families on both sides will be here, which is pretty incredible. You think about prophecy, that we're all here, and I feel very blessed, you know, to have my family nearby. It makes it a lot easier to move countries when you have your family there to help you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, family is huge. Um, that's really neat. And then lastly, where is it that you live in Israel?
So this, I mean, maybe I think your listeners may find interesting. So I live in a town called Efrat, which is literally, you know, up against the a much more well-known town, a city called Bethlehem. We're just south of Jerusalem, and Efrat and Bethlehem, even in the Bible, are really viewed as one place. In Hebrew, it's called Beit Lechem Ephrata, which is Bethlehem Ephrat. And this is right, we're right near where Rachel was buried, Rachel's tomb, which is in Bethlehem. But in the real world, it's really incredible. I mean, you can go to some of the houses here in my neighborhood and take a rock and throw it, and you can hit a house in Bethlehem. That's how close we are.
Wow.
We're on the hills and the valleys. We're like right next to each other. But what's amazing is that, you know, a Jew cannot enter Bethlehem. It is you would be putting your life in your hands. I've never been to Bethlehem, even though I live only a few hundred feet away from Bethlehem. Now, Arabs can come into Efrat. They have to go through security, just to make sure they're not terrorists. But they come all the time, and there are plenty of Arab workers who come here, and a lot of them are employed here, so they can come here. But a Jew cannot go to Bethlehem.
Oh,
So it's a very, you know, it can be a tense situation at times when things are not calm, and particularly this week after the terrible terrorist attack. A Palestinian Arab terrorist murdered 7 Jews on Friday night in Jerusalem, which is only a few miles from here. You know, a child. I mean, a really horrific attack on Friday night. So when tensions get high, and there are a spate of terrorist attacks, it could be a little bit intense living here. At the same time, you know, we're living just south of Jerusalem. When I open up my window, even my sliding door in my dining room, I walk outside, and I can see Bethlehem on one side. I see the next neighborhood of my Efrat town on the other, and straight ahead in the middle, I see Jerusalem.
wow.
And it's pretty astounding. You know, it's everything here is very hilly. These are the hills of Judea,
Mhm.
and so hills. You know, you really get an amazing view here, and I'm reminded every day. You know, I have to pinch myself that I live here in the Holy Land. It's really incredible.
Yeah, it must be really surreal. And then not only that, but living so close to Jerusalem, I'm sure that you go there somewhat frequently.
All the time.
Yeah.
It's also, I should just remind everybody that Bethlehem is the birthplace of King David.
Yeah.
And so, and King David is the forefather of the Messiah. And, and I close my eyes sometimes here and I think, maybe King David just, walked down this block where I am right now on this hill. He might have,
Yeah.
because this is really his birthplace. When he was a shepherd as a boy, who was scorned by his family, right, and not appreciated for who he was. He was a shepherd in the hills of Bethlehem, which is where we are right now.
I got a question for you. This kind of goes along with what we're going to talk about today, and this is something I was meaning to ask Rabbi Gerfine. I don't think my church has an answer for this. Why was it that King Saul, that he was from Benjamin, and then later it went to Judah? Because when we think about Jacob's blessing to his 12 sons, it's pretty clear that Judah was supposed to rule. But why was it that the first king was from any other tribe? Why was he from Benjamin?
So it's a fantastic question. It really is a great question. And yes, the tribe of Judah is the eternal tribe of kings for the people of Israel. But we had a temporary king, King Saul, from the tribe of Benjamin before him. Now, let's remember that Benjamin, right, is from his mother is Rachel, and Judah, right, his mother is Leah. And the idea of having kings from both of them, from both of these two tribes, right, it speaks to the unity of the people of Israel. But King Saul, right, he was meant from the beginning to be a temporary king, and he accomplished great things, but he was really, that person in between. The era before King Saul, before there were kings, was the era of Judges, the book of Judges, which is a very difficult time, and I think it's one that we'll talk about more as we talk about the tribes. But the era of Judges was very difficult. There was a lot of strife between the tribes. King Saul, right, he came and he was able to begin the unification process of all of the different tribes of Israel. And according to rabbinic to the rabbis, to the sages, King Saul was actually, a descendant of, or even he was one of the people who were from the story of the concubine of Gibeah, when the tribe of Benjamin was almost wiped out in a civil war by the other tribes. And so, if anybody understood the importance of the unity of the tribes, it would be King Saul, whose family had been through that traumatic experience. He came and he accomplished that for the first time after the people of Israel came into the land of Israel. It took hundreds of years. Finally, the tribes were united under King Saul. Now, ultimately, he was not the right person to be king. He was a very holy individual, but you have to be more than just a holy individual to be the king of Israel, right? You have to know how to be a king and to have a certain level of faith that King David had, and something that King Saul did not. But he was this transition king. I think that's the way to look at him. And in fact, his one, I think his father, his grandfather, his name is Ner, which is really the same root as Ner, as candle. And the rabbis have a beautiful story about King Saul's grandfather, that when people wanted to study the Bible at night, in the days before electricity, they weren't able to get to the study hall because it was very dark outside. Can you imagine? Pitch black. They couldn't see. And so King Saul's grandfather would light candles, like torches, along the way in the streets so that people would be able to go and get to their destination and to study the Bible. Meaning he enabled people to get to the destination of holiness that they needed to get to. And his grandson, Saul, would do the same thing. He was a transition from the era of Judges to, right, the era of King David and the kings of Judah, lighting candles along the way, just like his grandfather, and enabling us to get to the stage of history, which of course is the goal, right? Which is King David, and then of course his son Solomon, who builds the temple, right? So I think we can understand this also in a different way, which I think it might be a little bit mind-boggling if you've never heard this before. But we believe that this progression of kings, right, from the time of the judges to Saul to David and then to Solomon, is actually the playbook for the final redemption and the return of the people of Israel to the land of Israel.
Okay.
King Saul is the first stage, right? King Saul was the one who united the people, right, and enabled us to push back our enemies, right? And that really I think we're looking at today, right, the era of the secular pioneers of Israel, the ones who came in and were able to conquer the land in 1948. If you think about the old Israel, the secular kibbutz, the people who had maybe turned away from God, but also saved their people, right? And they really built the state of Israel, and we owe them great thanks. But they were a transition, right? The
Yeah.
ultimate goal was not to have a secular state of Israel here in the Holy Land. That's not the ultimate goal. But they were the first step, their first stage in the return of the people of Israel to the land of Israel. The next stage, right, which the stage which I think we're in the middle of right now, is the stage of King David. King David built upon the accomplishments of King Saul, but brought the people closer to God. And what we're seeing today in Israel is actually that. Unlike America, which is becoming more and more secular, and young people are turning away from religion by and large, in Israel, the younger generation is becoming more religious and more connected to the Bible.
That right there is surreal. Being here in America, it's hard to imagine youth becoming more religious. So that's
It's
amazing.
actually incredible. But I'll tell you, I have secular Israeli cousins who I knew them as a kid 30 years ago, and like they were voting for the anti-religious party. They hated the religious people 30 years ago. Now they marry traditional, Sephardic women, like who were more religious, and they keep the Sabbath in some way. I wouldn't say that they're fully traditional now or fully religious now, but they've stepped in the direction of tradition, and
Yeah.
they really are representative of Israeli society in general. So that's the stage of King David. But then what is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is not David. The ultimate goal is Solomon, right? We pray for the Messiah, the son of David, meaning we're praying for the future Solomon, who will build the temple in Jerusalem, which is meant to be a source of light, not just for the Jewish people, but for the entire world. That is the ultimate goal, right? Which is that everyone should be together, right, in holiness before God, that people can all come and visit Jerusalem and come to the temple. That's the ultimate goal. We're not there yet, but we are making progress, and it's unbelievable to be a part of it. So I'm not sure if you had that in mind when you asked me about Saul and David, but it's really they're really an incredible model for what is happening before our eyes today.
That's pretty amazing. And I'm glad that you shared that. Um, my viewers and I, we're always talking about things like that. We completely understand that, and it makes so much sense. I've always wondered that. It's a question that I've always had, and it makes a ton of sense. So he's a transition person and symbolic of the unity of all of Israel, all the tribes, essentially,
And let me
because
say one more thing on that front, which will bring it home. Where is the city of Jerusalem? Which
it's in,
tribal land does it sit upon?
yeah, it's in Benjamin.
It's actually on the border between Benjamin and Judah. It's
Oh, it's like
literally a
right on the
border
border.
city. Yeah, the border goes directly through the city because the city is not meant to belong to any one tribe, right? It's really there's a verse in Hebrew. It says Ki ir shechubra la yachdav. It is the city that binds all together. It's in a sense, to compare it to Washington D.C., right? Washington D.C. does not belong to any state, and purposely so, right? It's because it's the city that should be for all Americans because it's the capital. Jerusalem belongs to all of the tribes of Israel, but the fact that it sits on the border of Judah and Benjamin is very significant. Saul was not rejected, meaning he was rejected individually as king, but his tribe is essential, right? He is essential. Right? We need all of the tribes of Israel, and that's why it has to be on the border between Benjamin and Judah. And that's why King David, when he at first he was king only of the tribe of Judah. And so he made his capital in the city of Hebron, which is directly in the middle of Judea, of the tribe of Judah, which makes a lot of sense. But once David becomes the king of all of the tribes of Israel, he moves his capital to Jerusalem because he was showing the entire nation, I'm no longer just the king of Judah, right? I am the king of all of Israel. Everyone matters. We need every single tribe, right? And just as if somebody is a senator of Texas, you can't then just still be a senator of Texas when you become president of the United States. You have to care about everyone. You're the president for every state, blue and red. It doesn't matter, right? It's the same thing with David, right? And he understood that, and that's what Jerusalem represents. It belongs to every one of us.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's like Jerusalem seemed to be destined to become Jerusalem because originally that was where uh, Melchizedek was, right? And
Right.
in Judaism, I I've seen articles with my church where we think that Melchizedek and Shem are probably the same person. In Judaism, do you firmly believe that Melchizedek and Shem are the same? They're not two different
We have that
people.
tradition as well. Yeah, there's, I
Yeah,
mean, because it's not written explicitly in the Bible, but we have that is part of Jewish tradition. Yes.
yeah. So it's just neat that it seemed like it was all foreordained, and then David chose that. I don't know. It's really really neat how everything worked out, and
Well, what's interesting though, it's a little more complex. Meaning, you're right; it was foreordained because, as you said, Abraham and Melchizedek were there, and also according to Jewish tradition, right, it was the site of Jerusalem. The Temple Mount is the site of where Abraham brought Isaac, right, to sacrifice him. That it was foreordained. But if you look in the Bible itself, in the five books of the Bible, it does not say that Jerusalem will be the holy center. It says in Deuteronomy that the place that I will choose. It says the place that I will choose. It does not say Jerusalem. And so, for the first many hundreds of years, right, and throughout the entire book of Judges, right, the center of the religious center of Israel was not Jerusalem. It was in Shiloh, right, which was in the portion of Ephraim, right, which is from the children of Joseph, and that was where the tabernacle was, right, the temporary temple, for hundreds of years, and nobody had even conquered the city of Jerusalem. For hundreds of years, the city of Jerusalem remained a non-Jewish city, which makes a lot of sense because it was on the border between two tribes, right? Is any tribe willing to, sacrifice soldiers to conquer a city that's not even fully in their own area, right? It was a border city, and so when the people were very tribal and they were only thinking about themselves, if Judah was only thinking about Judah, when Benjamin was only thinking about Benjamin, neither one of them saw it worthy of, to conquer Jerusalem and to expend the blood, the soldiers that would be necessary to do so, because they didn't see it as being fully theirs, right? Which is so appropriate because only once the people are unified do they deserve Jerusalem and can they conquer Jerusalem.
that blows me away. The reason why this wouldn't be of so much of interest to you, but everybody watching, think about what Elie just said when we're thinking about New Jerusalem, which is in Jackson County, Missouri, which, essentially you have the Kansas City metro area, which is in both the states of Missouri and Kansas. It's a similar situation where you have a political border that divides the metro area, even though Independence is, right there in um, Missouri. I just wonder, just like how we have the Great Salt Lake, the Jordan River, and Utah Lake that parallels the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, and their Jordan River. This might be a similar parallel, and I'm probably going to dive into it and just kind of, we'll talk about it in a future video, everybody. But what he's saying right now is just really, really fascinating me, and I'm glad that it got brought up. Um, Now, in regards to this whole idea of unification, Benjamin, kind of Saul being from Benjamin, being a unifier, do you think that's why ultimately, um, like Jews today, the ones that were not conquered when the Northern Kingdom was conquered, do you think that's kind of why, you know, God kind of like the way that he organized things or foreordained things, the Southern Kingdom is mostly comprised of Benjamin and Judah. Like it kind of like that symbolism kind of like remained.
Right. Well, you wouldn't expect it to be Benjamin and Judah in the southern kingdom, right? Benjamin was from the tribes of Rachel,
Mm-hmm.
right? And from a different mother, and Judah was from Leah. And so you would have expected Benjamin to have gone with the northern tribes. But the beauty here is that the unity that they achieved, right, that David was able to achieve with the tribe of Benjamin, right? Because even though Saul from the tribe of Benjamin persecuted David, let's not forget Saul's son, right? Jonathan. Saul's son Jonathan, right, who sadly died in battle with his father, but his humility and love for David was astounding. In the book of Samuel, right after David kills Goliath, it says that Jonathan loved David with a pure love of friendship, and he actually takes off his royal garments, meaning Jonathan was the heir apparent. He was supposed to be the next king, but he takes off of his clothing, his royal garments, and he gives them to David. And he's totally comfortable with David becoming the next king. And he says, that I will work for you. I'll be your number two. And that really is what Jewish tradition is, what's meant to be, meaning the tribe of Judah is meant to be the king, but the tribe of Joseph is meant to be the viceroy, right? The vice president, the number two. Saul could not accept that, which was tragic and understandable, right? Not easy. But Jonathan, to his credit, was able to do that. And that legacy was repaid. After Jonathan was killed in battle, David adopted his son and cared for him and protected him. And the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, even though they had been at war, became so close, they became like one. And so even when the tribes then later split, in the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, they went their different ways, tragically. Benjamin remained with Judah, which was truly extraordinary. And if you look at future Jewish history, the reason why we're called Jews is because of Judah, because the vast majority of us, not me, I'm a Levite, but the vast majority of the Jews today, I am, but the vast majority of the Jews today really are from the tribe of Judah, but we're all called Jews, even if we're technically from Benjamin or Levite tribe or whatever it may be. We're all called Jews because the tribe of Judah really represents who we are, right? It's the royal tribe. It's the leading tribe. I live in Judea, which I'm honored to do. But it is really amazing, this relationship that went from war to being so close that Benjamin and Judah are really intertwined for the rest of history. And Benjamin has a glorious future, right? If in the book of Esther, right, where soon we're going to be celebrating the holiday of Purim in about 5 weeks from now. One of the most amazing holidays of the year. It's such a joyous time here in Israel. And who are the heroes of the story? Mordecai and Esther, they are descendants of Saul, right? Meaning he may have been flawed. He was a transition king. He wasn't perfect, but you see from his descendants what a great man he was. And ultimately, his descendant Mordecai, who is from the tribe of Benjamin, is called Mordecai the Jew, as if he was from the tribe of Judah, because the tribes became so close that the great Mordecai, even though he was from the King Saul, from the tribe of Benjamin, proudly introduced himself as a Jew.
Yeah, that is so neat, because these are just things that I did not know. By the way, everybody, you'll remember the last interview that I did was with Samantha Siegel, the one that discovered fish really close to the Dead Sea. And afterwards, after I was done talking to her, she told me that she is a Levite. So that's something that didn't come up in the interview. Wanted to let you know now. Like when we were talking about that, I was like, dang it, I wish that we would have brought that up in the recorded portion. Okay, so I have another question for you, and I haven't seen any explanation about this. When I've looked at maps of ancient Israel, all the land that the tribes were assigned, you have Simeon that was essentially encompassed by Judah. But like whenever we're talking about modern day Jews, usually it seems like the three tribes associated with modern Judaism is Levi and Judah and Benjamin. Shouldn't that also include Simeon? Because weren't they essentially kind of assimilated over time?
Yeah, Simeon is a fascinating tribe to discuss. Interestingly, if you look back, going back to Genesis, Simeon and Levi were associated together. They were like the dynamic duo, right? When their sister Dinah was kidnapped and raped by by the city of Shechem, by the prince of Shechem, right? It was a terrible tragedy there in the book of Genesis. So what happens, right, when Jacob is trying to do diplomacy and he's kind of in discussion with this town, right? Simeon and Levi, what do they say? Our sister's raped, and we're going to do nothing. And it seems barbaric, but the truth is there's something very powerful about this, about standing up for their sister. They go and they slaughter all the men in the town. I mean, it's really incredible. and save their
as they're
sister.
healing from being circumcised.
Yes, as they're healed. Exactly. So Jacob is very angry at them and curses their anger later on. And at the end of the book of Genesis, when he's blessing the different tribes, it seems like Simeon and Levi don't really get much of a blessing. Right? Their anger is cursed. And Jacob says that I will scatter you among Israel. Now we see that that's exactly what happened. Right? Simeon was absorbed into the tribe of Judah, and they were given desert land, which is really not so habitable. They had that, they could have some sheep and whatever, but they had a hard time making a living. And that was purposeful because they then had to scatter themselves around the land of Israel, working as scribes and teachers and so on in order to make a living. So they were scattered. And Levi as well, right, was purposely scattered. There were Levite cities. There were Levite cities in all the different tribes of Israel, and so these two tribes really don't have their own territory. Now, why did Jacob say that? Now, was it just a punishment? I don't think so. I think that these tribes were scattered because, on the one hand, what they did was amazing. They stood up for their sister, and I don't know. I hate to think of such a thing. God forbid if it would happen to my family, but if somebody did that to my sister, I'd be ready to shed some blood, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't blame them, right, to a great degree. These were evil people. I mean, and I understand it. I have a little blood boiling in me because I follow my great great grandfather Levi. It's in my DNA. But so on the one hand, it's quite honorable. On the other hand, if so much intensity and passion, if you put too many of us crazy Levites in the same place, it's a little dangerous. And so Jacob said, we want to scatter you among Israel because everybody needs a Levite. Everybody needs somebody from the tribe of Simeon, to that passion, that fire, the one who's going to stand up for what's true and what's just. But you just can't have too many of those people in one place. And so not only in Israel, but throughout all of Jewish history, God has put Levites, in all the different places that Jews have lived to ensure that somebody was there to stand up and with the fiery passion that's necessary. But on the other hand, you can't just have that. It's got to mix in together with the other tribes. But if you want to go, I'll take you one step deeper.
Okay.
Because initially, Simeon and Levi, they were like brothers in arms, right? They're always associated together. But if you look later on in the Bible, right, once you get to Exodus and to Numbers in particular, you find that they go in different directions. The tribe of Levi, right, the Levites become the holiest tribe, right? The Aaron and the priests come from Levi, and they're the ones who come and support Moses during the sin of the golden calf. And so the tribe of Levi, right, it becomes the holiest chosen tribe, right? My tribe, we serve in the temple, we sing in the temple choir, right? The tribe of Levi is exalted. But what happens to the tribe of Simeon? It's like he goes in the complete opposite direction. It's like two twin brothers they seem to be the same all along. One goes in a great direction. He goes to Harvard and he gets himself a big job, and the other one, winds up in prison. And what happens with Simeon? He ends up doing terrible things, right? With bringing plague upon the people. Though there's a whole terrible plague where thousands and thousands of people from the tribe of Simeon specifically died. Because they were consorting with the Midianite women and worshiping idols. I mean, he falls into really a terrible state. And Simeon becomes the lowest of the tribe, the opposite of Levi. And so you have this strange situation where almost like two twins, they were so close, going in completely opposite directions. And in fact, if you look in the book of Judges, the only tribe that does not produce even one judge is the tribe of Simeon.
Oh.
Right? That's how low they had fallen. And so they had to be absorbed, so to speak, into the tribe of Judah. So we certainly have members of the tribe of Simeon today, but they lost much of their identity, and were the only way that they can, in a sense, be kept as part of the people of Israel in a healthy way was to be absorbed into and cared for, so to speak, under the framework of Judah. And that's it's an interesting story. Why did they go in different directions? It's a whole big discussion. But the fact that they went in opposite directions, I think, is something worthy of thinking about.
Now, my understanding is that if you're Jewish, it's determined by your mother, but your tribe is determined by your father. Is that right?
Exactly.
Now, within Judaism worldwide, you do come across people that identify with other tribes other than Benjamin, Levi, and Judah. Like they've maintained their lineage intact.
So a great question. So there's a few pieces to this. We know that the 10 northern tribes were exiled, right? And to a great degree lost for a very long time. But we have found some of those tribes, and we've done so like really in very provable scientific ways. It's really incredible. Ethiopian Jews who were brought back to Israel in the 1990s, not that long ago. Ethiopian Jews were exiled from Israel during the first temple era. If you remember, right? That's when the 10 tribes were exiled. And they maintained their identity for thousands of years. You know, you're talking about they were exiled many hundreds of years before the birth of Christianity, right? And they lived really on their own, separated from the rest of the people of Israel, and for thousands of years in Ethiopia. They maintained their identity, and they came back. Now they've come back to Israel, and their tradition, and it's been proven, is that they come from the tribe of Dan, which is truly extraordinary.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is that when they came to Israel in the 1990s, right, first of all, they didn't know anything about planes. They were afraid to get on a plane initially. Like, what is this? They on this miraculous flying, eagle, gigantic eagle, right? I mean, that's how backwards it was in Ethiopia. But when they came to Israel, they wanted to go to the temple. They didn't know the temple had been destroyed, the first temple.
Oh no, what a disappointment.
There were
for them when they
there
found
are
out.
there's video, there are pictures, you can read articles about this, about Ethiopian Jews breaking down in tears, weeping when they found out that the temple had been destroyed. The first temple, let alone the second one being built and destroyed as well. And it's really, really, truly extraordinary. So they actually have a holiday that they developed, for a few thousand years on their own, which has now been adopted in Israel as a national Israeli holiday. It's very cool. It's in the fall. It's called Sigd, Sigd. Sigd. It takes place 50 days after Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So it's in the fall, and it's really an amazing day. And what they would do was they would go to the highest mountain near wherever they lived in Ethiopia, and turn towards Israel and Jerusalem, and they would and ask God to forgive them for atonement, because the tribe of Dan, they had turned away from Jerusalem thousands of years ago. If you read in the Bible, in the Book of Kings, they set up idols in the tribe of Dan, and they stopped coming to Jerusalem. And so for thousands of years after being exiled to Ethiopia, right, their descendants were asking God for forgiveness that they had turned their backs on Jerusalem, and they were facing Jerusalem for thousands of years, waiting to come home. And they did, only right in the 1990s. I remember when it happened. I was a kid, as a teenager, when the Ethiopian Jewry return began. And frankly, and honestly, there was another flight of Ethiopian Jews that just came a couple of months ago. So it's still happening. So
Gosh, so
that's one tribe, but there have been other tribes as well in Burma, India, like on the border, on the edge of India, really far away from Israel. Another tribe, which is a descendant from Manasseh,
yeah,
was
the
found.
Beni Manasseh, right?
The B'nai Manasseh, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's really, really incredible. And they've set up communities here, even in Judea and Samaria. You'll find the B'nai Manasseh, and Samaria in particular is amazing because that was their ancient homeland. And they have a tradition that they come from Manasseh. So we do have groups of Jews. They're a much smaller group than the Ethiopians, but we do have groups of Jews that trace their lineage to different tribes. But we also have, according to Jewish tradition, we do believe that we have a little bit of all the tribes among us, meaning the vast majority are Judah and Benjamin and Levi. But if you look in Jeremiah, it says that Jeremiah brought back some of the exiles, a few of the people from all the different tribes. He did bring back to Israel, and they assimilated into the rest of the people. And so we do have, and I'm not sure that people know who they come from biologically, but we do have representatives today, I'm certain, from all the tribes.
Yeah, that is really cool. And then it's interesting that you said that about Jeremiah. In my church, we have the Book of Mormon, which it's scripture that comes from a branch of the tribe of Manasseh. There was a prophet named Lehi, and I've always like kind of like thought about that, how he was not from any other tribe. He was from Manasseh, even though the northern exile had already started. I always, I guess I just assumed that, you know, maybe just him and his family had lived down south or something like that. I wonder if maybe Jeremiah had something to do with him. But anyway, so that's interesting to my audience. um I've done a lot of looking into these different groups throughout the world that have claims to be descended from you know, the northern tribes, like, you know, like you said, the B'nai Manasseh. There was another one, the Cochin Jews, that were um I guess they came like a lot earlier though, but they were from the other part of India, from the basically the west coast.
There's a real community of Indian Jews. It's really incredible. And I have a good friend actually whose mother is one of those Indian Jews. They actually There's a whole community of Indian Jews living in the south in Dimona, which is a town in southern Israel, which is most famous as being the unofficial home of Israel's nuclear bomb. So the nuclear reactor is there. It's a whole secret complex. You know, I'm not saying that I have anything to do with it, but I'm glad that Israel has it defensively. It's very
Yeah.
important. But it happens. So Dimona is filled with Russian Jews who are the Russian Jewish scientists working there, as well as a whole Indian community, an Indian Jewish community. And I think it's important to mention this, to realize that Judaism is not, an ethnicity. There's been a lot of anti-Semitism in America recently, and referring to Jews as these, as the white oppressors and whatever. This
Yeah.
whole focus on race is absurd. There's nothing. I have no problem being white, but Judaism is not an ethnicity, right? We have black Jews, we have white Jews. It doesn't matter what race you come from. Judaism really is more of is a family, right? And meaning you're born into it, and so you can be. That's how one way to be part of the family if you're born into the family, or you can convert to Judaism, sort of like an in-law, somebody who marries into the family, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it has nothing to do with race, and so you'll find you have Indian Jews, you have Jews from everywhere in the world, Ethiopian Jews and of every type, right? I think, and also the majority of Jews in Israel are Sephardic Jews who come from Arab lands, who are much browner than they are white in
Oh,
terms
that's
of
the
skin color.
majority is Sephardic.
The majority of Israel today is Sephardic, and they are actually more traditional. And they're a big reason why the right wing in Israel is in control politically right now, because right, they are the base that votes for Prime Minister Netanyahu, right? It's the Sephardic Jews, the traditional Jews. They, by and large, you don't find in among Sephardic Jews, the Jews from the Arab lands, you don't find as many people who are very secular. They might not be totally traditional. They may not keep the Sabbath fully, but they're somewhat traditional. They feel connected to God and to religion, right? They believe it. They don't necessarily practice it because people are people. We're not perfect, but they're a very traditional society, and they're a big reason why Israel has become more traditional over the years as opposed to more secular like most of the world.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I guess in my mind, for some reason, I was picturing the majority being Ashkenazi rather than Sephardic. So that's
So that's how it began, right? Most of the original pioneers of Zionism that came in, in the early 1900s, they were Ashkenazic Jews that came from Poland, from Russia, Germany, and all these kinds of places, right? But then, after Israel was successfully declared independence and fought off the attacking Arab armies in 1948, all of the Arab countries, all of them, they banished their Jews. They expelled their Jews. So all these different countries from, unbelievable. Like all the North African countries, there were ancient Jewish communities there. Tunisia, Yemen, all these places, Morocco, they banished their Jews and they moved en masse to Israel. And they played a huge role in Israel's massively expanding population. This is a fun fact. Can you take a guess how many Jews were in Israel in 1948 when Israel was established as an independent country again? How many
um,
Jews were living there?
well, probably less than a million. I'm not sure.
You are good. There were 600,000.
Gosh, that is so...
600,000, that was it. And 6,000 of them, 1% of the population, died in the War of Independence. Fast forward to today, there's over 7 million Jews living in Israel. So obviously, that's not just natural growth. There's an enormous ingathering. These are the prophecies that have come true from the north, from the west, from the east, from everywhere. But the largest group, right, were the Sephardic Jews from the Arab lands, and the other, major group that came, of course, were Soviet Jewry, the Jews who were, from Soviet Russia, were finally allowed to leave in the late 80s and early 90s. There's over 1 million Russian Jews that came to Israel. So the ingathering has been astounding, and it's amazing that. How about I'll say it this way: it's not surprising that there are societal, cultural tensions in Israel among our tribes. Like in the old days, we're like repeating the Book of Judges a little bit.
Oh no, yeah.
Because we're coming from so many different places and we've been apart for so many thousands of years. But my firm belief is, just as we finally figured it out, and just as Saul and David finally united the tribes, so too, right, all of our tribes here in Israel will one day be united. And once we're united, then all the terrorists, all these people who are trying to kill us, they won't have a chance. The only reason they have any success now is because we're not together and unified as a nation.
Yeah.
But God willing, the day will come, we'll be unified and in harmony, and our strength will grow, and the terrorists won't have a chance.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully that comes sooner than later, the unity. And I've covered a lot about how it seems like you have all these different wars and stuff that happen, but and it's horrible, but I think that God uses that as an opportunity to do something good. So for example, with the Ukrainians that are fleeing, they're seeking refuge in Israel, that may be meant to be. I'm sure that it is, like, to bring some of them home. And by the way, everybody, like I've said before, I'm supporting 2 charities with Israel365, one of which is to support Ukrainian orphans that I guess have been orphaned. They're in Israel. So if you can, please donate to that. I have the links for both charities in the description below. The other one is to help plant trees in Israel, to basically help it blossom as a rose, right? And help
What's
bring the
amazing
land back to...
is that both of these charities, right, really are correspond to prophecies coming true. And thank you so much for your support on this front, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
The orphans that that we're referring to here, there was an orphanage in Ukraine that with 60 Jewish children, that the bombs started falling. Some of these children were in the orphanage because their parents were unable to care for them. Some of them actually lost parents in the initial bombing of Ukraine this past year, which is really, they're really traumatized in that way. They fled, and thank God the amazing couple, the Jewish couple that was running this orphanage, they brought these 60 orphans to Israel. They now have a permanent home, and we are together, supporting these 60 orphans. It's really, really incredible. But you think about prophecy and what is happening here. 60 children will, God willing, grow up to form 60 families and have many, many more children of their own. And who knows, right? Maybe from among those children will be, the future redemption of our, of our people of the world. We have no idea. So this is one of those classic examples, as you're saying, Jared, just the way that good can come from evil, and that these children, they need our help, but the truth is we need them, right? If more of them come back to Israel, Israel becomes stronger and stronger, and we'll get closer and closer to the redemption. So it really is amazing. We're actually participating in first of all, just the most incredible kindness. The Bible says to take care of orphans, endless number of times. But to be able to do so in the service of fulfilling prophecy is just, it's humbling. And then the other one that you mentioned, the planting trees, this is another great miracle of our time. Israel was a wasteland. It was the most disgusting, desolate land in the world 100+ years ago. Mark Twain wrote a whole book about how horrible Israel was.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Israel, he wrote, A Pilgrim's Progress. It was a famous book. It was a bestseller in America. He went in the 1860s, and he said he was disgusted by this land. It was so desolate. It was filled with rock on top of rock, and there was no soil left.
It's like
And now
Arizona.
Israel, and now Israel is this unbelievable, beautiful, flowering nation. It's a modern miracle. I mean, it is. It's an absolute miracle. And then, in addition to the miracle that we participate in planting trees, by doing so, we're actually, helping the people of Israel hold on to the land because there right now, Arabs. It's a whole complicated story, but the Palestinian Authority, actually, with the help of the European Union, are stealing Jewish land throughout Judea and Samaria. And because of political reasons, the Israeli government has not done a good job of preventing it. And the only way, really the best way to prevent it, is when Jewish towns who own the land can then plant trees on their land, which keeps the thieves away from that land. It doesn't allow them to build upon it. So
Oh,
it all at once, it's causing the land to flower, right? Places where trees haven't grown for 2,000 years since the Romans burned them down, which is astounding.
yeah.
But not only is it bringing prophecy to life, it's actually enabling the people of Israel to hold on to the land and prevent theft. So it's both prophetic and incredibly practical all at once. It makes a very big difference.
That's really neat. So everybody, if you can, please support these two charities. They're for really good causes. Um, we're coming up on about an hour, but I have just one last question before we end this. Um, so there's different groups, like say, for example, you have the Pashtuns in Afghanistan, or you have the Igbos in Nigeria, and I guess they have a strong tradition of believing that they're descended from Israel. Who who would make the decision of whether to, I guess, accept them as bona fide Jews? I know that there's like, what's it called, a bite or a bet din, I think. I'm not sure, like a Jewish court. How would that process come about? Like if the Igbos really wanted to make a case that they're Jewish and therefore they should be able to also make aliyah to Israel or whatever, how does that get decided?
So this is one of the great challenges of our time. It's really something that our great grandparents could ever have imagined. First, that we'd be back in Israel, and secondly, that these hidden tribes or people wanting to say that they're Jews all around the world. It's kind of an amazing phenomenon. But it is a very, sticky, difficult, delicate situation. The challenge here is that these people have been separated from the main body of the people of Israel for so many years, so many thousands of years, and often have intermarried and mixed in together with other tribes. And it's essentially impossible to know if they're actually Jewish, right? Because according to Jewish law, there are only two ways to be Jewish. Either your mother is a Jew and her mother is a Jew, all the way back up to the 12 tribes of Israel, or you can convert, which is not a simple thing. Everybody's welcome to convert. Everybody, where we don't turn anyone away, but it's a serious process. You're taking on 613 commandments and living as a Jew in a way that not everybody is ready to do. And so it's one of the great challenges. It's a big reason why you have not seen an influx of thousands of people of these people from Nigeria to Israel. It has nothing to do with racism, right? Because thousands and thousands of Black Jews have come to Israel from Ethiopia, right? But the tradition is significantly stronger. And in the areas of Ethiopia where it was not strong, those people were actually required to convert when they came to Israel,
Oh, okay,
which is to
okay.
their benefit, right? Because if they convert, and it's really the chief rabbinate of Israel, the chief rabbis of Israel. There are two, the Ashkenazic chief rabbi and the Sephardic chief rabbi. So if they convert formally, so they might feel a little bit insulted that they're being required to convert. I always identified as a Jew. Why are you making me convert? On the other hand, on a very practical level, it's a good thing for them to convert because then they are formally accepted with the paper stamped as Jews in Israel, and then there's no issue with them marrying another Jew in the state of Israel. And that's a very big deal because if people question whether they're actually Jewish, they might, and we let them come to Israel, right? And then they may not find people to marry, right? They might be seen as outsiders, and we don't want to create divisions like that. And so, in these cases, there have been groups of blacks from Africa communities who really were amazing people who maybe had a tradition that they were Jews, but they worked together with a rabbi from Israel. They spent a few years studying and becoming really connected. they converted, and then the community, whoever wanted from the community moved to Israel. Some stayed in Africa, and others came to Israel. But there's no barrier in that sense, other than the conversion itself. So it's a little bit of a complex answer, but it's very important for Jewish unity that these conversion standards be maintained. And when I say the conversion standards, I mean traditional biblical Orthodox Judaism. And this, I don't know if this is something you talk about very much on this show, but the majority of Jews in America are not, I guess they consider themselves Reform or conservative with this. They don't necessarily identify as traditional Jews, and it's a very sensitive topic. But those standards of conversion, which are much easier, it's very easy to convert to be a Reformed Jew. They're not accepted in Israel. And so Israel is a traditional biblical rabbinate, appropriately so. And so that can be the cause of some division between American Jews and Israeli Jews. So
Yeah.
I just threw a lot at you, but I'm
No.
trying. There's a lot of subtlety here.
Yeah. What about with the conservative movement? Like, do they have stricter standards, or would their
So the
decisions be
conservative
accepted?
movement, it's a funny name for it. I mean, it really was always between traditional Judaism and Reform. They were a little bit more traditional than Reform, but not quite. But unfortunately, from my opinion, in the last many years, the last 20, 30, 40 years, they've really become almost like Reform. So none of those conversions would be accepted in the state of Israel. And it's painful, and we're not happy about it. Meaning, I feel badly when somebody with a Reform conversion wants to move to Israel. But really, according to Jewish law that we have followed for thousands of years, right? They are not Jewish, and to have them come to Israel and marry a Jew, it would be tremendously problematic. And so, Israel, even though it's very painful, has to maintain these ancient standards, right? The standards of the Bible. We can't water it down,
Yeah.
unfortunately. That's just the way. That's otherwise Judaism itself would be lost.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It makes complete sense. Okay. I know I said we were any just one last thing. Um,
Sure.
so I would assume that Jews that are Orthodox are probably much more likely to go to Israel, right? Uh, so that like as time goes by, there's probably gonna be less and less Orthodox that are in the United States and in other places. Does that sound right?
So it's a great question. You're right. The percentage of American Jews who move to Israel that are Orthodox is much higher than the percentage in the population, right? If in America, let's say 13-14% of Jews are Orthodox, but I don't know the exact numbers, but it might be 50 to 70 or 80% of the Jews who move to Israel are Orthodox. But at the same time, the Orthodox community in America is growing, while the Reform and conservative community is shrinking. And the reason for that is twofold. On the one hand, Orthodox Jews have a lot of children. It is totally normal to have a lot of kids. We have a relatively small family. My family, we have 4 kids. My brother has 8. And if you go to the Hasidic Jews, many of them have 10, 15. I mean, it's unbelievable how many kids. So even if some of them move to Israel, the community in America is still growing. We want more of them to move to Israel. That's our hope. At the same time, sadly, the Reform and conservative Jews are slowly disappearing, or maybe not so slowly, quickly disappearing, because the intermarriage rate is so incredibly high. It's in many places over 80% of non-Orthodox Jews are intermarrying, and so essentially they're disappearing. So all over the country, all over America, these Reform synagogues, conservative synagogues are merging with each other because they don't have enough people to fill the buildings and to keep the buildings going. So they are, even though they're still technically larger than Orthodox Jews in America, they're disappearing. And the fact is, if you go to most Reform synagogues, you'll find that a huge percentage of the people there are not actually Jewish. Because it's spouse people who married, and so it just sadly it's really been falling apart, year by year in America.
I guess it'll be interesting to see what what things are going to look like in like 10 or 20 or 30 years. Like it may
I think the
just be a
American Jewish
completely different
community is going to be
landscape.
smaller and more traditional, meaning what's left will be much more religious and traditional and biblical, but it'll be a smaller community.
Yeah. All right. Well, Elie, Thank you so much for your time today and for coming on. You guys have been so good to me and opened up so many opportunities for me and my audience to learn more about Judaism and connect and be able to actually do something to help support Israel, through the donations, and just it's been really good. So thank you once again.
Well, thank you so much, and I really want to thank your audience as well, to everybody who donates. But just even beyond that, this encounter, this connection, this friendship that we're building is really significant, and I think it's part of the messianic process. I mean, I don't know that our great grandparents could have imagined, something like this, that we'd be sitting and hanging out and talking together and having this kind of a friendship and a connection, and I just hope that it continues and that it flowers with, look, mutual respect and admiration, right? Where I don't want to make you into me, you don't need to make me into you. We can appreciate each other and learn from each other. And on that front, also, I'll encourage everybody. We have daily study emails. If you want the Jewish perspective, from with insights from Hebrew on the Bible and things like that, if that can enrich your own connection to God and your own service and worship, Jared will share it all with all of you, and I would love to be in touch and be connected going forward. So thank you so much for having me on. It's a great honor.
Absolutely. Now, if you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.